I grew up in a little small town in South Arkansas, Camden, Arkansas, and there was a huge naval ammunition depot down there during World War II. Still there as an industrial site, and there's still a lot of defense contractors. And as a consequence of that, there was a Navy Reserve unit down there because there were a lot of guys that stayed in Camden and wanted to stay in the reserve. So it was a little Naval Reserve unit there. And my high school coach was the commander. So I'm a fourth generation from Ouachita County, and my father was an attorney. And so in a little small town like that, you always think, well, I can get this fixed. So we all had to, register with the selective service, and we knew we were going to be drafted one day if we didn't go to college. You had a college deferment available 4 years and go to OCS or ROTC or whatever. Well, my father had been in the Army Air Corps. And I think, as I told you, I met one of the pilots for the Doolittle raid lived in my hometown.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they had a reunion there one year. He ran the hotel there, and I met Doolittle and some of those flyers, and I just got fascinated with flying airplanes. So that's what I wanted to do, go in the Air Force. Well, I stumbled pretty strongly on my freshman year, and that set me back a year. And then because of my grades, I was unable to stay in advanced ROTC. Did 2 years. So when 4 years ran out, I got drafted, and I had nowhere to turn except to my coach. And so I went out and joined the Naval Reserve so I could go back to Fayetteville and finish my degree, which I did. Okay. And there was a reserve unit there. So then from there, I applied to OCS and pilot training for the Navy. And I couldn't get into OCS because I flunked the math. And so all these things I believe are providential looking at them. But anyway, that's the way it turned out. So I had a 2-year active duty component. So I left when I graduated in May of '67. Went on active duty in August of '67. Went San Diego. Had no idea. Hadn't done any training whatsoever in the Navy. I'm just a buck seaman. And the big deal was it was about 75 guys, and a lot of them were reservists that I had gone through boot camp a year earlier. And so we were all sitting around, and everyone said, man, some of us going to end up at the Naval Support Activity in Da Nang, and we don't want to do that. Well, there was, out of the 75 in our transit group, 3 of us got orders to Naval Support in Da Nang, me and 2 other guys.
No, you're one of them.
So I had no rate or anything in the listed ranks. They're called rates. So I just show up, and good news.
You weren't even a boatswain's mate or anything.
Nothing. No.
Yeah.
But I had the college degree, and I had been around in the reserves long enough to know that they put me cleaning barracks. Basically, it's what you do. You either clean or work in the kitchen. And so I went over to the personnel office and found me an officer and got an appointment with him and sat down with him and said, look, I got a college degree. It's a business degree, and I can type, do office work. Surely there's something y'all can do here. And so this little division of the Public Works Department, real estate and contracts, I had my major was real estate. And this had a yeoman billet. Yeomen are the admin guys in the Navy. And it's me and a Lieutenant JG. Well, the billet was actually an E5, E6 billet, and I'm an E3. And so, but they wrangled around, he and my commanding officer and this guy, they figured out a way to put me in the slot. There were 10,000 support troops in Da Nang at that time, including the Naval Support Activity, Army, Air Force, etc. So Public Works was totally responsible for, I'm going to refer to the term I-Corps. You probably know what it is, but that's the northern part of South Vietnam at the time.
Right.
So Public Works was responsible for maintaining electricity grid, building stuff in secure areas and unsecure areas for the Marine Corps primarily. Air Force Base. I was at the Air Force Base 2 or 3 times a week. Now the Marines had a air wing out there, and we did projects with them and did stuff for the Air Force.
Yeah.
And then same thing would apply to all the facilities. If anything, if one of the things that we dealt with in Vietnam, the Viet Cong operated at night. And so they would send sappers, these guys that have charges and blow stuff up. But if we had any kind of problem at night, we had to go fix it. So the particular base where it happened would be repaired. In my case, in real estate contracts, part of this whole Vietnam experience was Vietnamization. How can we get the South, build them up so they've got an infrastructure, an army and a navy, et cetera, and an infrastructure to support themselves. Don't get off on how that didn't work like it should have, but that was the idea. So we were pouring money into the locals. And so we had 4 or 5 just basic contractors that would bid on projects. The Marine headquarters was up at Freedom Hill. We had the Air Force Base. You had MAC, the Marine Corps helicopter base up at Marble Mountain. And then all these other residual facilities around. I built swimming pools, bowling alleys, buildings, built a bowling alley up at Freedom Hill. And so we would put it out for bid. The contractor would come in. I'd get the plans and specs. That's how I learned the construction business. I'd get the plans and specs, present them to the contractors, and they would give me a bid. And then we present the bid to a committee of officers, and then they would decide what contractor got what.
Now, these are Vietnamese contractors?
All Vietnamese, totally.
All Vietnamese.
And
how could you be sure, or could you be sure, that there weren't Viet Cong or Viet Cong sympathizers doing the work? Was there any way to be sure of that?
Well, you in terms of the workers, you could never know for sure. In fact, there's always these stories. We had a project up at Don Ha, which is up on the DMZ for the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And we all kind of laughed, and we'd send out CB inspectors when we did that would do the people that owned the contracting companies were all well vetted, and they hated communism, and they would do anything to eradicate it. And then the crews were managed by the men, and then the women ran the business. A lot of these women are very smart women, and they knew how to run their businesses. But yes, if they got up in Dong Ha, they got attacked one night, and as our inspector said, the bricklayer, whatever his name was, we found him in the wire the next morning after the attack. So he had been in there working all day. So yeah, that was a problem, but it wasn't a huge problem. We dealt really with the people that ran these little businesses. Now, after Tet, the security for Da Nang was primarily with the ARVN Army, the Republic of Vietnam Army. Yeah. And we rented an office building there. It was a house that we had redone. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 ARVN soldiers on the fence around it, and 2 ARVN soldiers. Well, after Tet, we started putting Marines out there. So Marine MPs became our guards after that. There was you may have in your discussions heard the word MACV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, which was basically run by the Army, but it was all the services were involved. Yeah. So there was a civic action building about 3 blocks down the street from us that interacted with a lot of Vietnamese, and just on a regular basis. And some woman came in there one day to do business with her briefcase and left her briefcase. And when she left, it exploded. Wow. Didn't kill anybody, but it blew the legs off of this Marine that she was interacting with at his desk and wounded a lot of people. So security became a lot tighter. And then on the 23rd of January, before Tet, we had another problem. We had the Pueblo incident. Now, most people don't think too much about that, but for us, that was very serious because I had to stand watch every 7 days. So I had a secret clearance, and we'd get all these messages. And so they were counting sailors and ships and Marines because there was some indication we might end up in a war with Korea at the same time. So that got very tense.
Really?
But we had Marines on our compound, and the sappers were very careful not to blow up American facilities. The whole political thing with Ho Chi Minh and Giap, who was the general, don't stick a sharp stick in the Americans' eye, because we don't want to make them any madder than they're already mad. And so they would blow up Vietnamese facilities, primarily police stations and things like that. And that became fairly frequent. I got involved in the only really combat situation. We had a friendly fire accident in our office one night and almost killed one of the Marines. Wow. One of my contractor guys was down. They have to come in every 30 days from the field, and he was down there that night when I had the watch. And about midnight, we had a sapper attack down the street, and the Vietnamese army, they would shoot up. That big scare was they would shoot up and down the street. So you'd hear automatic weapons fire, and you're not sure. I'd been in country 10 months, so I'm getting ready to go home. And I remember, and I had protocols. I carried a pistol mostly. We had other weapons, but I carried a pistol most of the time. And so the protocol was that one of the guards would come in and give us a brief on what's going on. And because if I needed to call a captain or something to take care of some battle damage, that they would go do it. So he comes in the door. As he's coming in the door, unbeknownst to me, this Inspector CB has an automatic weapon with him in his briefcase. Wow. And he panicked. And the lights were out. I wasn't worried. I mean, I'd done this before. And so when he opened the door, he opened fire on him. And the good news was he hadn't shot this. It was a 45 caliber old World War II style burp gun. But the kick, the MP only took one bullet, went through his hand right here where he was carrying his M16, split and went in his leg. Wow. And we found the rest of the bullets the next morning in the ceiling, the wall and the ceiling. But as he's falling, he says, they're coming down the street. They're coming down the street. And I went, well, doo-doo. I wasn't expecting this late in my tour, but they weren't. Turns out it wasn't a big deal.
So you said that after Tet, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the Armed Forces that had been the guards around Da Nang, they were replaced by Marines. Was that because of a certain loss of confidence in ARVN performance during Tet? Oh,
probably some of that. We all didn't have a great deal of confidence in the ARVNs that we were around. Yeah. Now, I've known buddies that were in the Marine Corps and Army, just guys that had a great deal of confidence in the ones they served with in these outposts. But I suspect, and I interacted with our ARVN guards frequently, they were probably either recruits or I did not count them as heavy combat troops, but
right,
that was part of it. But I think it was really more for security. You didn't know for sure, whether they were sympathizers or not. The day of Tet, we worked from 6 to 6 every day. And where I lived at Camp Tenshaw was 6 or 7 miles out there. Yeah. So we'd drive into town, and it was about 5:30. We're crossing the bridge. Sun's just coming up, and we see there was a helicopter pad right there by the bridges. And we see several gunships operate, and we thought, what is this? We've been getting messages that something was coming, but Da Nang got caught off guard. And so as we're crossing the bridge, there are guys down there, and we're not carrying any weapons that day, because a lot of days we just didn't do it. So these guys are waving us off the bridge, and instead of turning around and going back, we carried on, and we had to abandon our truck and just lay in a kind of a ditch until they clean this village out. Well, the Vietnamese, the Marines or the Army helicopters, and they were supported by the ARVN troops. When they killed, this is the first time I've really saw dead bodies. When they killed VC, they left him out on the street for 10 days. So there were 10 bodies that laid by that helicopter pad every day. You drive by it for 10 days to display that they meant business.
To the locals who sympathized with the VC, that was the point, to send a message?
Well, actually for Tet, if you study the Tet offensive, Da Nang had been a primary target. But if you'll remember, the Battle of Wei kind of slowed it down. So they never really got to Da Nang. Da Nang was not very secure. It was, you talked about things on the base where there was no base. It was an air base that was pretty secure. Then I lived out at Camp Tenshaw, and that was relatively secure, but not really. It was at the base of Monkey Mountain, and we'd get sniper fire and stuff like that in there, but it wasn't anything major.
Yeah.
And we had some Marines and some Special Forces out there. In fact, we had the Korean Special Forces live out there as well.
Really? Wow.
But most of our work was just out and about.
What other things come to mind when you remember the Tet Offensive?
Well, for us, after a few days, we just back going to work. It was a high security issue probably for a month, 6 weeks, and then it kind of settled back down to normal.
Yeah.
Once they kind of the Battle of Wei. I can't remember how long the Battle of Wei was, but once that got over and they got now once it all settled kind of back down to where you were. One of the things that happened after Tet, several of us decided we probably need to be going to chapel. So we started, three of us started going to chapel.
Oh.
And the chaplain said, look, you had Dong Ha, you had Quezon, and there were a couple of other outposts were getting hit pretty hard and lots of wounded. So we were typically off on Sundays. So we would go, me and another fellow would go out to the Navy hospital there where they were bringing in the wounded and help the corpsmen triage. And that was very eye-opening. I mean, you see some pretty rough stuff, bringing helicopter, and they had a difficult time getting soldiers out of Quezon because they were getting blasted,
bombarded.
Yeah, and I knew some guys that were at Quezon that didn't make it. So some Marines. So that was one of the things that kind of kept it alive for some of us is the wounded. And again, the security was a lot higher from that point on. One guy was a nephew of a chief petty officer that I worked with, and we'd drink some beer with him, and he told us he'd come out on R&R. He said, when I get back, I'm done. And he was killed 2 weeks later. I had a close friend that was in the Navy that was killed in Saigon, in Camden.
What was his name?
His name was Gerald Hamm, Hamm. And he was killed kind of as a random, he was on LST, and they'd moved it from Da Nang down to, and I didn't find this out till I got home. It happened right after I got home. In fact, I had to go with him to tell his mother, and that was kind of hard. They asked me to go with him to tell his mother when he died. I'd been home maybe 3 weeks. Well, the sad thing is that somebody called me when I got home and said that Gerald was in Vietnam on LST, and he'd been in Da Nang. Well, I went to the LST ramp in Da Nang frequently. It's where we unloaded supplies and stuff. Very secure, very safe. Never had any problems there. But unbeknownst to me, so I went to see her 2 weeks before he was killed and told her, I said, I think Gerald's fine. I said, I didn't see him, but I know the boat, I know the ramp. Well, what happened is they transferred his ship from Da Nang to Saigon. And when they got to Saigon, there were some random mines as they were getting ready to set up on a ramp that the boat hit. And just blew, he was down in the hole, down, and killed him. Then I had to go back and when they told her that he was dead.
Now you actually did some work in downtown Da Nang, right?
That's where my office was. Oh, yeah.
What was it like? I mean, downtown Da Nang, if you just wanted to leave the office and go out by yourself, was that okay?
Oh, no, I walked the streets all the time. In the daytime, it wasn't a problem.
Really?
I mean, the only time that we had to be careful, and when I had the watch, every 7 days I had the watch. You'd go to the message center, which was at the White Elephant on the river down there, about 3 blocks
Yeah.
from where we were. And you had to make your message runs every 4 hours. So you make the first one at 8, 12, and then 4, then 4 in the morning, 8 in the morning. And those dark ones are walking that street at night. I always kept my pistol loaded. They have little dim street lights. But yeah, no, during the day, and I had a driver's license and I was out and about. So I had a pickup truck. And I think I sent you a picture of my friend, Steve Catellis, the oldest man in the Navy.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was doing, but he was collecting shoes for the orphans, and I became his driver. When I came home, I left Da Nang on a troop transport. We landed at Norton Air Force Base and took the bus over to LAX, got a ticket. My wife at the time she was graduating. She was working for a hospital over in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I bought a ticket to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, I didn't go anywhere. And the Navy operates a little differently than Army and Marine Corps. They operate in units. Navy doesn't operate in a unit. It's all individual jobs for the most part. Now, the Seabees do have construction battalions, but I wasn't in one of those. I was just assigned. I was a yeoman assigned to the Public Works, which was run by the Seabees.
Right. Yeah.
And I had a CB rate too. I ended up with a CB rate and a yeoman rate when it was all said and done. But that was bad. That was a bad transition because you've been gone for a year. I didn't see any particular protests. I had some encounters when I moved to Little Rock with people that made various comments about it, but I just kind of brushed it off because I'm married and trying to get on with my life. So I came straight home, 58 hours travel time.
Wow.
And then you're back I was home for 30 days and then I moved, transferred to Memphis for about a month and got out. Psychologically, it would have been better for everybody to at least have a week or two at a camp or somewhere to get reoriented back to life, because you've lost a year of
Right.
time. A lot happens in a year.
After a year there, working a lot with the Vietnamese, you said you trusted most of the ones or all of the ones you worked with closely. But after that year, did you feel confident that South Vietnam would be able to stand on its own?
Yes, but I didn't know. Of course, back in those days, I didn't understand all of the geopolitical forces that were involved in that. But in terms of watching them interact and with their attitude and what we were doing to train them, I felt very confident that it could have come about. They had a Navy. We were giving them boats and some small ships, and we were training. They were flying airplanes. So I think had we had not screwed it up years later and cut the money off, I think they would have had a potential chance. But in looking back on it and understanding the involvement of the Russians, et cetera, I look back and see now it wasn't going to happen. The Vietnamese had the will, the South Vietnamese had the will.
Yeah.
But then they had their own political, it wasn't a democracy. It was not ever going to be,
Yeah.
But I think so. I think they had the confidence that they could have done it if we'd at least continued to pay a little money to them.
Yeah. So are you among those then who feel that, when South Vietnam came under attack 70 in the mid 70s, 74, 75, and Saigon Falls in 75, it sounds like you're among those who feel like the U.S., left an ally in the lurch, that we should have come to their assistance at that time rather than let them be overrun by the North.
Yeah, there's no question. And I got plenty of close friends, and I guess from my perspective personally, I wonder, Mr. 10 was my instructor. Did he get out? And Mrs. 10, who had children, I'd go to birthday parties for her children. Did she get out? So you kind of felt like those of us that had relationships like that, felt like, well, golly, these poor people. So yes, I hate it that we didn't do more to, because they were neat people. I remember Christmas '67. They had this lady kind of like Japan did. They called her Hanoi Hannah. And when we were at the enlisted men's club drinking beer, they would pipe her radio messages, and she was talking about Ho Chi Minh coming to Camp Tenshaw and having Christmas lunch with the Navy. We laughed.
Yeah, that's what I.
She didn't scare anybody.
That's what I.
And we were pretty confident too as soldiers, quite frankly. And people would say we all weren't very well trained, but I was very well trained. I went to Marine Corps weapons training, went to survival school, and knew a little bit of the language. I couldn't tell you what it is now, but yeah. So I felt, for what I was doing, felt very well trained and could handle any emergency if we had to do it.
Sure.
And was willing to. Vietnam is just another chapter of experience, but frequently I'll look at, when I'm in a tough spot, I'll think about, you know what, God got me through this environment over there. At times I could have been killed. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities for getting in trouble. And I was driving around the countryside by myself in a gray Navy pickup truck. I think about that sometimes, and it kind of scares me when I'm going up to Freedom Hill and with nothing but, as I felt like Barney Fife, nothing but a 45 and 2 clips. But that's an experience in life that I use frequently and say, you know what, we did this, we can do that. So I guess the thing that I feel the hardest about is that we left them. We just left them. When I talked to my wife and I were down in Gulf Shores, and I went down on the pier one morning to take pictures of the sunrise, and there was an old Vietnamese man there fishing. And he had the same story my mailman did. He had been put in jail. He had been in the Army. And I told him, I said, you know, I'm sorry. He said, no worries. I'm here now.